What's up, y'all? Roy here. You're listening to the Clems with a Z podcast. Now, like most of y'all, I spend more time on social media than I'd like to admit. And the more I scroll, the more it feels like noise. Everyone's talking, posting, reacting, but not really listening. It's just this constant stream of you're wrong. No, you're wrong. Politics, religion, culture wars, personal attacks. It's all in there. A tangled mess of arguments and just hot take. And honestly, sometimes I have to stop and ask myself, is any of this moving the needle? Is using these platforms, whether it's social media, a pulpit, a podcast, yeah, I'm talking about myself too, to yell and scream at each other, actually helping anyone? Is it changing hearts? Is it healing wounds? Or is it just adding more noise? I see it in evangelical spaces too, the same patterns, just wrapped in church language. It's like we've gotten so focused on proving our point, defending our theology, and correcting other people's worldview that we've stopped doing the one thing that I believe Jesus never stopped doing, seeing the human being in front of us. And I'm not pointing fingers without looking in the mirror, honestly. I've asked myself, and I'm asking it now, if I'm guilty of the same thing. Am I using this platform to speak to people, or am I just adding to the noise? Because when all we do is talk at each other, we stop looking for the pain, the hurt, the fear, and the uncertainty, all these things that we all carry in the person in front of us. We just zero in on being right. And I keep coming back to this question: when did we lose the ability to actually see each other? And maybe the better question is, how do we get it back? For me, there's a word that names exactly what I think we've lost. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've probably heard me talk about it before. It's a word called sonder. For me, that's the word that I think names exactly what I think we've lost. Now, it's a word that comes from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows by John Koning. And the definition of sonder is this: it's the realization that each random passerby is living a life as vivid and as complex as your own, populated with their own ambitions, friends, routines, worries, heartbreaks, and inherited craziness. An epic story that continues invisibly around you, while you might appear in it only once, as an extra sipping coffee in the background, as a blur in traffic, or as a lighted window at dusk. And I love this word because it describes a shift in how you can see the world. It's a moment that when you're in an airport watching people rush past, or sitting in traffic, glancing at the driver next to you, or standing in line at the grocery store, and you suddenly realize they have an entire life. Not just a surface life, but a deep, complex story. A life filled with joy, grief, ambition, regret, ordinary routines, and extraordinary memories. They've had moments where they felt invincible and moments where they felt like they couldn't go on. And when you remember that, when you really see that, I believe something changes in you. It's harder to flatten people into categories or enemies or hashtags. It's harder to treat them like a project or an obstacle because you realize their life is just as vivid, messy, and sacred as yours. And I think Sonder is something that Jesus lived out every single day. In the stories, when I read the Gospels, I see him walking into crowded, noisy, divided spaces, much like ours, and refusing to reduce people to their labels. Instead, he looked for the human being in front of him. So I see that word sonder almost everywhere in the Gospels. Jesus wasn't walking through life handing out generic religious slogans. He wasn't trying to win arguments. He was speaking directly to people's humanity, to their pain, to their fear, to their longing, to their hope. The crowd saw a sinner, maybe, but Jesus saw a woman terrified for her life. That's the story in John 8, a woman caught in adultery. He's dragged into the public square, surrounded by people ready to stone her. And what does Jesus do? He doesn't start with a theological lecture. He starts by protecting her dignity, by creating a space where she can stand without fear. Then there's the story of a corrupt tax collector. Jesus saw a man desperate to belong. That's Zacchaeus in Luke 19, climbing a tree just to catch a glimpse of Jesus. People hated him for the way he exploited them. They had every reason to. But Jesus calls him by name and says, I'm coming to your house today, not to shame him, but to share a meal, to restore his humanity before addressing anything else. There's a story where a crowd saw someone unclean. Jesus saw years of rejection and whispered prayers in the dark. That's the bleeding woman in Mark 5. He risks everything just to touch the edge of his cloak. And instead of ignoring her or letting her slip away anonymously, he stops. He looks at her. He calls her daughter. Now, that doesn't mean that Jesus never critiqued or challenged people. He absolutely did. He called out hypocrisy, greed, arrogance, and injustice. But here's the difference. His challenge never came at the cost of losing sight of someone's humanity. Even when he confronted people, it was from a place of seeing them fully, their story, their complexity, their dignity. Over and over, Jesus refused to let the crowd's label define the person standing in front of him. He stepped past the noise and the judgment, and he spoke to the human being, the complex, vivid, sacred life right there in his path. And so when I look at the way Jesus engaged people, the way he saw their humanity first, even when he was challenging them, I can't help but notice how far we've drifted from that in so many spaces today. And I'm guilty of it as well. In evangelical culture, especially, we flip the order. Instead of starting with the person, we start with the point we want to make. Instead of asking, what's their story? What are they carrying? We jump straight to, here's what's wrong with you. We're quick to correct, quick to defend, and quick to argue. And we've convinced ourselves that we're doing it out of love or because we're speaking truth. But if we're honest, so much of it is just about proving that we are right. It's about winning some theological argument or securing your position in some culture war. And yet, the more I watch, the more I see something else underneath all of it. I see people speaking through fear. I see people wrestling with their uncertainty. I see people trying to make sense of a world that no longer looks like the world they thought it would be. And in that confusion, it's way easier to latch on to certainty than it is to sit in mystery. And it's easier to fight than to feel. It's easier to speak at someone than to pause long enough to really see them. The tragedy is that when this becomes our default, people stop feeling like human beings. They start feeling like projects to fix, enemies to defeat, or targets to take down. Yeah, we might have all the right words, but we've lost the right posture. And somewhere in the middle of all the debates, the sermons, the posts, the comment threads, the person right in front of us disappears. We lose sight of the sacred story they're living in, the pain they've endured, and the image of God they carry. And I can't and I won't talk about this without turning the mirror back on myself. Because the truth is, I'm not immune to any of it. I wish I could say that I always approach people the way Jesus did, with that deep awareness of their humanity, but I sure as hell don't. I've had moments and I have moments. online, in conversations, even here on the podcast, where I've wondered, am I actually just adding something helpful to the world right now or adding to the noise? It's a hard question for me to ask myself, and it's hard for you to ask it because if you answer it honestly, it forces you to admit that your motives aren't always as pure as you think. I'm not immune to it. There are many times that I'm speaking through my own fear, through my own frustration, and through my desire to be understood or even to be right, more than my desire to actually understand the other person. And I'll be honest, I want to critique this. I want to challenge this. I see and hear so much on these evangelical spaces and on podcasts and in YouTube that just angers me, that stresses me out, and yes, even hurts me. And I have this deep desire to speak to that, to push back against it, to name it for what it is. But the tension that I'm living in with that is that I want to be a different voice. I don't want to just throw another rock into the chaos, even if that rock has truth written on it. I don't want to be just another angry sound in a sea of angry sounds. I want to participate in the conversation, to critique, to challenge, but always from a way that points towards healing and not towards winning. And that's not easy at all. Because there is a fine line between calling something out or someone out and simply adding to the pile on, between critiquing systems and dehumanizing the people in them, between speaking truth and forgetting that the person I'm speaking to is a complex, living, breathing story just like me. And the reality is the platforms we use to have these conversations don't make it easier. Clicks and likes are addictive. The little dopamine hit you get when some people agree with you or share your post or pile into the comments on your side, oh, it feels great. Pulls you in towards saying things that'll just get a reaction instead of things that will bring understanding. And if I'm not careful, I chase that feedback as well, more than I'm chasing the truth. If I lose sight of the humanity in the person I'm speaking to, then I'm no different from the voices I've been critiquing, and you aren't either. And that's a humbling realization because it means this isn't just a problem out there, it's a problem in me. And maybe that's where this change has to start. Not with figuring out how to get everyone else to see each other's humanity, but with asking how I can do it better myself. Because the more I think about this, the more I realize that simply speaking to someone's pain and their humanity and not just their position, it's a radical act. It's not flashy. It's not the kind of thing that gets you trending, but it's the kind of thing that makes people stop, breathe, and maybe for a moment feel seen. And that's what I want to move toward. Because the truth is, most of the loudest voices in our world, especially the worlds of politics, religion, and social media, are doing the opposite. They're speaking at people. They're treating pain as a weakness to exploit, not as a wound to tend to. And in the stories in the Gospels, I don't know if I ever saw Jesus do that. He saw the wound before the wrong. He saw the person before the problem. And he still spoke truth, but the truth that came wrapped in presence, dignity, and a refusal to turn someone into an object lesson. What if we reclaimed that? What if we became people who didn't just argue points, but asked real questions? People who didn't just try to prove others wrong, but tried to understand where their fear was coming from. People who were curious about the story behind someone's position instead of just trying to dismantle the position itself. Because the more I think about it, the more I believe that when we speak to pain, we open a door that arguments can't. Pain can create a bridge, it says. I see you. I don't have to agree with you to recognize that you're carrying something heavy. And in a world that is desperate to be heard but terrified to be known, that kind of presence is almost revolutionary. So here's my invitation to you, and honestly to myself too. Before you post, before you comment, before you step into that conversation you already know is going to get heated, pause. Pause long enough to remember this person has an entire life just as vivid and complicated as mine. Pause long enough to consider what pain they they might be speaking through right now. Pause long enough to ask, can I speak in a way that sees them, even if I still challenge what they're saying? Because if we want something different, we have to be something different. And that's not going to come from winning more arguments or racking up more likes. It's going to come from actually seeing people the way Jesus did and speaking in a way that honors their humanity, even if we disagree. You might not change their mind. You might not even change the tone of the conversation, but you will be planting something different in the soil. And over time, I believe that matters more than we think. So let's try it. Let's be the people who see the person before the problem. Let's be the people who speak to the human, not just at them. Let's be the people who, in the middle of all the noise, dare to live sonder. I'm not just saying this to you, I'm saying it to me. This is as much for me as it is for you, because I need these reminders every time I sit down at this mic, every time I open my phone, every time I step into a conversation that could easily turn into another shouting match. We all need them because the moment we stop seeing the human in front of us is the moment we stop being the people we were meant to be. So, hey, thanks for listening today. If this episode resonated with you, made you think or challenge, or just gave you a moment to breathe, let me know. Reach out. You can do that at clemswithaz@gmail.com or direct message me over at Instagram at the Clems with a Z podcast page. I'd love it if you like, subscribe, rate, review to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. It also helps these conversations get to more people. If you want to go deeper, you can find more of my work over at Substack. It's called the Devotionals for the Disillusioned and Deconstructing. I write about faith, doubt, and the space between. If you want to support the show directly, you can go to the GoFundMe, links in the show notes. You can also head over to clemswithz.com, grab some merch or something. Every little bit helps. But thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for helping me try, and I mean really try, to be a different voice in the middle of all the noise. Peace.